At 7:12 in the morning, four content creators pulled off a dirt turnout along a side road outside Zion National Park, unloaded a drone case and two phone gimbals, and hiked toward a narrow slot canyon most visitors never see. By 7:40, one of them was climbing an unroped sandstone face for a 15-second clip. By 7:41, she was on the canyon floor, and nobody was filming anymore. This is the story of Mia Torres, 24 years old, the newest member of a four-person outdoor content group, and the 40 minutes that led up to a fall that should never have happened on a route her own friends had climbed a dozen times before. The group called themselves Canyon Collective, four friends in their mid-20s who had built a modest but growing following posting short-form video from public lands across the Southwest, rope swings over desert pools, sunrise time-lapses from exposed ridgelines, drone footage threading through slot canyons. Nothing they did was, on its face, unusually reckless. Most of what they posted was legal, public land content that thousands of other creators were doing the same season. Jake Ellery, 27, was the group's de facto leader, the one who scouted locations, held the main following, and did most of the technical route finding. He had been climbing and canyoneering for almost a decade, mostly self-taught, with a handful of guided courses early on that had given him a real foundation. He was careful in the way that experienced people often are. Not risk-averse, but rarely reckless either. He knew this particular slot canyon well. He'd climbed the short technical face at its narrowest point at least a dozen times. Priya Nandan, 26, handled most of the camera work, gimbal shots, drone piloting, the editing that turned a 15-second clip into something worth the following it got. She wasn't a climber by background, but she'd been coming on these trips for 2 years and had picked up enough rope and movement skills to follow the group's easier routes competently. Colton Reyes, 25, was the group's stunt-adjacent presence, the one most willing to push a shot for the sake of the content, and the one whose confidence sometimes outran his actual technical skill. He'd had a couple of close calls in the past that the group joked about more than they examined. Mia Torres, 24, was the newest addition. She'd joined the group 4 months earlier after meeting Priya at a gym, and while she was fit, athletic, and enthusiastic, she had almost no technical canyoneering or climbing background. She'd done some indoor bouldering, she'd hiked. She had never climbed unroped sandstone in her life before that morning. Nobody in the group thought of this as a meaningful gap. She was athletic. She'd kept up on every hike so far. The face they were about to climb was short, maybe 12 feet, and every one of them had done it before without incident. The section of canyon they were headed to wasn't named on any official map. It was one of dozens of minor slot formations scattered through the sandstone country around Zion, known mostly through word of mouth among local climbers and canyoneers, and increasingly through the kind of geotagged content that groups like Canyon Collective were themselves part of spreading. The specific feature they wanted was a short, polished face near the canyon's narrowest pinch point, a wall of Navajo sandstone worn smooth by centuries of flash floods, rising maybe 12 to 15 feet, with a scramblable top-out onto a wider ledge that gave a clean, dramatic angle for the kind of overhead drone shot the group had planned. Jake had climbed it multiple times. It required no rope in his assessment, just a handful of specific holds, comfortable footwork, and a controlled mantle onto the ledge at the top. What none of them factored into the plan that morning was the overnight low. The night before the shoot, temperatures in the area had dropped into the high 30s, a sharp, clear sky radiational cooling event common in the high desert, where daytime heat escapes rapidly overnight under cloudless conditions. By the time the group arrived at the trailhead a little after 7 a.m., the air temperature had only just climbed back into the mid-40s. This detail matters more than almost anything else in this story, and it's worth explaining exactly why. Sandstone, like most rock, changes its physical properties with temperature. Cold rock is typically harder and, in dry conditions, can actually offer excellent friction. Climbers in many regions specifically seek out cold mornings for exactly this reason. But Navajo sandstone in canyon country carries an additional variable that a lot of climbers underestimate: overnight cold combined with even minimal moisture, dew, residual damp from a recent rain, or simply the humidity that collects in a shaded, narrow slot canyon overnight can leave a polished sandstone surface with a thin, nearly invisible film of moisture or condensation that dramatically reduces friction, especially on rock that has already been worn smooth and glassy by years of flash flooding. This is different from what most climbers picture when they imagine wet rock. There was no visible water on the face, no obvious sheen. To the eye, in the low early morning light of the canyon, the rock looked exactly like it always did. Jake, who had climbed this face a dozen times, had always done so in the afternoon, after the canyon walls had been in direct or reflected sun for hours, warming and drying the rock completely. He had never climbed it on a cold morning, straight off an overnight low in the high 30s, in a canyon that hadn't yet seen direct sunlight that day. Nobody in the group checked the rock. Nobody ran a hand across the face before committing weight to it. Nobody asked the specific question that would have mattered: has this surface actually warmed and dried since last night, or does it just look the same as it always does? The group reached the pinch point a little after 7:20. The morning light was good, low angle, warm-toned, exactly the kind of shot that performs well. Jake set up the drone for an overhead pass. Priya positioned herself on a ledge across the narrow canyon with a gimbal for a side angle. Colton went first, climbing the face in about 8 seconds, mantling onto the top ledge cleanly and giving a thumbs up down to the group. He hadn't noticed anything unusual about the rock's texture, but he also hadn't been paying close attention to grip quality specifically, focused instead on hitting his marks for the camera. The idea for the shot was simple. Each member of the group would climb the face in sequence, creating a short, multi-angle sequence for a reel. Quick individual clips of each person sending the route, cut together with music. Jake went next, clean climb, no issues. Then it was Mia's turn. Mia had watched both Colton and Jake climb the face without apparent difficulty, and from the ground the moves looked straightforward, a few specific hand and foot placements that both of the more experienced climbers had pointed out to her the first time she'd stood at the base of a similar route weeks earlier. She had climbed smaller, less exposed versions of routes like this one with the group before, always with someone spotting from below, and always on rock that had been sun-warmed for hours by the time they got to it. This time, nobody suggested a spotter. The face was short, 12 feet, maybe less, and in the group's collective, unspoken assessment, it fell into the category of routes low risk enough not to need one. Priya was behind the gimbal. Jake was checking the drone's framing. Colton was already at the top, repositioning for a follow-up angle. Mia started up the face. Her first two moves matched what she'd watched Jake and Colton do. Her foot found the same small ledge they'd both used, but as she shifted her weight onto that foothold to reach for the next handhold, her boot slid. It wasn't a dramatic, sudden slip in the way people often picture climbing falls. It was small, a few inches of unexpected slide, the kind of thing that on dry, sun-warmed rock would have been arrested instantly by the friction her boot sole would normally have found. On rock still carrying the thin residual dampness of an overnight low in the high 30s, that friction simply wasn't there. Her foot kept sliding. She grabbed for the handhold above her, missed the solid part of it by an inch, and came off the face. 12 feet is not, in the abstract, an enormous height. It's roughly the height of a single story of a building. Under many circumstances, a fall from that height onto the right surface at the right angle is survivable, sometimes without serious injury at all. Mia's fall was not one of those circumstances. She fell backward off the wall rather than down along it, meaning she had no opportunity to control her landing the way a climber trained in fall technique might instinctively try to. She struck the uneven, rock-strewn canyon floor at the base of the face, sandstone rubble and small boulders, not the flat sandy wash bottom common in wider sections of canyon country, landing on her back and head. The sound, according to what the group would later describe, was immediate and unmistakable in a way that told everyone present before anyone had even reached her that this was not a minor fall. Priya was the first to reach her, dropping the gimbal without a thought for the footage still rolling inside it. Mia was unconscious, breathing but shallow, with an obvious deformity to one arm and blood beginning to pool beneath her head. Jake, despite years in the backcountry, found himself for a moment simply frozen, the specific paralysis that can hit even experienced outdoors people in the first seconds of an emergency involving someone they know well, rather than an abstract worst-case scenario. It was Colton, scrambling back down from the top ledge, who broke the freeze, shouting for someone to check for cell signal. There was none, not at the canyon floor, not at the rim above. This is one of the defining and most dangerous characteristics of Zion's minor side canyons. Many of the small, unnamed slots that draw content creators and adventurous hikers precisely because they're less crowded and more authentic than the park's marquee trails also sit in cellular dead zones, often for miles in every direction. The same seclusion that made the shot appealing was now the single largest obstacle to getting Mia help. Jake made the call that any wilderness first responder would recommend: leave one person with the injured hiker and send the fastest, most capable member of the group back toward the trailhead and the road, where a vehicle and eventually cell signal might be found. Colton went. Priya stayed with Mia, doing what she could with a basic understanding of first aid, stabilizing her head and neck as best she could without proper equipment, applying pressure to the head wound, monitoring her breathing, talking to her in case any part of her could hear even while unconscious. Jake began climbing back toward the rim himself in the opposite direction from Colton, on the chance that a slightly different vantage point might catch a signal the canyon floor couldn't. It took Colton almost 25 minutes to reach the trailhead, another few minutes to get a usable signal, and just after 8:15, the first call reached Washington County Emergency Dispatch. Zion National Park's search and rescue team, coordinated with Washington County Emergency Services, mobilized quickly once the call came through, but quickly in a remote side canyon still means real time. A helicopter was requested for extraction, given the terrain and the apparent severity of the injuries described. By the time a rescue helicopter reached the canyon and technical rope teams were lowered to Mia's location, more than 90 minutes had passed since the fall. Priya had done everything within her limited training to keep Mia stable during that window, but a traumatic head injury combined with a suspected spinal injury in a patient who had been unconscious for the better part of 2 hours in a remote canyon with no advanced medical intervention represents exactly the kind of injury where early minutes matter more than almost any other variable in survival and outcome. Mia was extracted and flown to a trauma center. She was pronounced dead a short time after arrival. The specific cause was consistent with severe traumatic brain injury sustained in the fall. For anyone climbing or scrambling on canyon country sandstone, a few things from this story are worth carrying forward. Check the rock, not just the route. Familiarity with a specific face climbed under one set of conditions does not transfer automatically to a different time of day or a different overnight low. A physical check, a hand run across the actual holds you intend to use, takes seconds and catches a hazard that is otherwise essentially invisible. Calibrate risk to the least experienced person in the group, not the most experienced. A route that one climber has done safely a dozen times is not automatically appropriate for someone attempting unroped, exposed movement on real rock for the first time, regardless of how straightforward the moves look from the ground. Be honest about how content goals affect pacing. A shot list, good light, and a sequence of people moving through the same route back to back can subtly discourage exactly the kind of pause, checking the rock, adding a spotter, reconsidering the plan, that safety in this terrain actually depends on.